So yesterday Warner Brothers announced that multiple Lord of the Rings films are coming out, and that sounds great, at least on paper. But I do have some concerns, especially after watching Amazon's The Rings of Power. So in this video, I'll share with you what we know about these films, if I think it's good ideas, and lastly, what bits of Tolkien's Legendarium could become great films. Back in August, when Embracer Group bought the rights for The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they also mentioned that they wanted new Tolkien movies to come out. Back then they said there were a lot of opportunities with the franchise, with films about Gandalf, Aragorn, Gollum, Galadriel and Éowyn. So let's try and dive into that and discuss if it would be a good film or not. On paper, Gandalf does have a lot of adventures in Middle-earth, though many of them are unknown or covered briefly. I think the issue here is that Gandalf's main quests are already covered in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. It's going to be rather impossible to top that, unless you start to make up stuff and create an entire new story. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think Gandalf would make a good protagonist. He's more of a mentor that would help and guide the protagonist. At the same time, lots of people love Ian McKellen in the role, so if they go with another actor, it might put some people off. Well, that's at least what I think. Next we have the Aragorn film. Of course we already have fan films like Born of Hope and The Hunt for Gollum that already explore a little of Aragorn's life, but I don't think that would impact Warner Bros. Decisions. I do think you could make a good Aragorn film. There's enough material in the appendices to adapt into a full feature film. It would probably have to start around the time Elrond reveals his real identity to him, which is also the year he meets Arwen for the first time and goes into the wild. We know that he entered Moria from the east at some point, so that would be interesting to include, though we don't know what happened, what he saw, and what he did there, except he refused to talk about it to the Fellowship. Aragorn would also befriend Gandalf, so he could play an important role in the film as well. I think the most interesting part of Aragorn's life would be his time as Thorongil, where he served in Rohan and later Gondor. Here he also attacks the Corsairs of Umbar, and I for one would love to see Umbar in a film for once. I do of course have some concerns, as they would have to make up a lot of stuff about his story for this to be adapted as a good film. But it could work, I think. And the third character Embracer mentioned is Gollum. I do love the character, but a full movie about his origin story doesn't interest me that much. Sure, it could be interesting and fun, but nothing on par with The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, so I would have to say no to that idea. The Gollum game is also coming out later this year, so people would probably already know a lot about this character and his story, from the game at least. Gollum could play a role in Aragorn's story though, as Aragorn would hunt for him for quite a while, so if included that way, it might work fine. And the fourth idea, Galadriel. On paper that sounds interesting, but the issue is that most of her story is covered in the Unfinished Tales, and they don't have the rights for that book. So they would have to invent most of the story, just like Amazon, and we all know how that turned out. I actually think Amazon's portrayal of the character have damaged her value, so people dislike her even more now, so it's a big no on a Galadriel film, at least for me. And the last idea they mentioned, Éowyn. I think the issue with her character is that we've already seen the most interesting aspect of her life in The Lord of the Rings. She didn't actually do anything noteworthy before that, and after The Lord of the Rings, she's no longer a shield maiden, and instead care for healing and growing things in Ithilien, along with Faramir. I don't think there's enough material in that for film, and if they turn her into some warrior princess, killing orcs in the Fourth Age, I think they totally misinterpret Tolkien's vision of a character arc. That would be really, really bad. So these are the films Embracer, at least I've mentioned, could be something. I do think there are other stories they could adapt of the Third Age. Of course we all want stories of the First Age, from the Silmarillion especially, but sadly they don't have the rights for those stories, at least not yet. Instead it would have to be Third Age events they could focus on. So here are some of the stories they could adapt into films. Il the Young and the Founding of Rohan. An interesting story where a Gondorian messenger sends word to the LOTR that Easterlings are attacking Gondor from the east, and that they are in need of their help. I think there's a lot of cool stuff to explore in this story, and Galadriel even plays a minor role in it. I also think many fans want to see the Easterlings more, I do at least. I think the issue with this story is that the longer and more detailed version of it can also be found in the Unfinished Tales. Next there's the Civil War of Gondor, known as the Kinstrife. It's a truly fascinating time in Middle-earth's history, with a lot of elements that could make a great film. I think there's one major concern with it though. It's not very Tolkien-like. It's mainly men fighting other men. So there's no orcs, hobbits, wizards, elves or dwarves, or anything like that. And if they do include it, well, it can't really play a major role in the story, unless they change the lore a lot. So while I would love to see it as a film, I don't think it's something they will want to cover, at least not early on. The dragons of the north attacking the dwarves. There's sadly not a lot of stuff to adapt, unless they want to include Smaug attacking Erebor again, but I doubt that. Instead, it would probably focus more on Dain the First being killed by a dragon, along with his son, and how Thror and Goror fled to Erebor and the Iron Hills. They could include Fram and how he slew Scatha the Worm. That would be interesting to some extent, but not really enough for an entire film, I think. Balin's expedition to Moria. Where the dwarves try to recolonize Moria. It's an interesting story and one I really love. And there are dwarves and orcs in it at least. I'm not sure that would be enough for it to succeed as a film, but I would gladly watch it. But I do think it needs a bit more to it though. And the last event I think could be adapted is also the most exciting one. But also something that would have to be a trilogy or even more films. The Fall of Arnor, The Rise of Angmar, The Awakening of the Balrog and Khazad Dûm, and The Last King of Gondor. All these events happen in a row and could all work well as films. I think especially the destruction of Arnor would be interesting to depict. It also has a lot of checkboxes. There's a well-established villain with the Witch King. We have orcs, men, hobbits and elves. There's also Elrond and Círdan that could play a role. And of course, the fan favorite Glorfindel. I think The Awakening of the Balrog is less interesting, but it could be cool to include. I don't think it's strong enough for a standalone film, so it would likely have to be connected to the other story. Did the dwarves play a role in the war though? No, not really. So that's another concern if they do adapt it. But the Fall of Arnor, combined with the events in Gondor, would also have Haradrim and Easterlings in it. So I think that could be epic and the best thing to adapt. That's at least my opinion. Would it be on par with the Lord of the Rings? Well, probably not. But I do think it could be better than the Hobbit trilogy we got. But let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. Which story do you hope they will cover? And do you have any concerns with these upcoming films? If you want to support the channel, you can join through Patreon or become a member here on YouTube. Thanks to all the current supporters of the channel. As always, thank you all for watching and being part of the Council of the Rings. Farewell till next time.